I am Hester Wilson, 68 years old, and the proud mother of my son, Thomas. My husband, Michael, passed away 15 years ago, leaving me to navigate life alone. I worked hard my entire life, ensuring Thomas received the best education possible. Now he is married to Ivy, a woman who seems to view me as an inconvenience. They invited me to Christmas dinner at their new mansion, and I was looking forward to it, despite my apprehensions. Little did they know I had my own surprise waiting. Before I tell you what happened at that Christmas dinner, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you want more real-life stories like mine. The story of how I got to that Christmas dinner begins many years ago. I met my husband Michael when we were both 22, working at the same insurance company. He was smart, kind, and had the most infectious laugh. We married within a year and had Thomas 2 years later. Michael and I weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood with good schools, which was our priority. Michael was always so proud of Thomas. He would beam at every school event, soccer game, and award ceremony. Thomas was a bright child, excelling in math and science. When he expressed interest in business and finance during high school, Michael couldn't have been happier. He would spend evenings discussing the stock market and investment strategies with our son, nurturing his interest. We had always planned to pay for Thomas's college education. We saved diligently, opening a college fund the month after he was born. But life rarely goes according to plan. Michael started experiencing chest pains when Thomas was in his senior year of high school. We thought it was just stress from work, but the diagnosis was more serious: coronary artery disease. The doctor said he needed to reduce stress and follow a strict diet and exercise regimen. Despite his health issues, Michael insisted that Thomas apply to the best universities. When Thomas was accepted to Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, we were ecstatic. It was expensive, but we had saved enough to cover most of it. Michael kept working, saying he would be fine, but he wasn't fine. During Thomas's sophomore year, Michael suffered a massive heart attack while at work. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. I was 49, suddenly widowed and devastated. Thomas was equally devastated, but I insisted he stay at school rather than come home. His education was what Michael had wanted more than anything. The insurance money helped, but it wasn't enough to cover both our living expenses and Thomas's remaining tuition. I refused to let Thomas take out loans, knowing how that could burden his future. Instead, I took on a second job. During the day, I continued working as an administrative assistant at the insurance company, and in the evenings, I worked as a bookkeeper for a local restaurant. Weekends were spent helping with inventory at a retail store. It was exhausting, but I was determined. Thomas would call and express concern about how hard I was working, but I always downplayed it. I didn't want him distracted from his studies. When he offered to take a semester off to work, I firmly refused. That wasn't the future Michael and I had envisioned for him. Thomas graduated with honors, and I couldn't have been prouder. He landed a job at a prestigious investment firm in Boston, and his career took off rapidly. I finally allowed myself to cut back to just one job, though I continued to live frugally out of habit. 3 years after graduating, Thomas met Ivy at his firm. She was from a wealthy family and worked in the marketing department. When he first brought her to meet me, I could sense her assessing my modest home, my simple clothes, my unpretentious lifestyle. There was a subtle tightening around her eyes, a forced quality to her smile. But Thomas was clearly smitten, so I made every effort to welcome her. In the beginning, Thomas would visit every couple of months. We would have dinner, and he would share stories about his work successes. After Ivy became a permanent fixture in his life, those visits became less frequent. It started subtly. Phone calls that used to last an hour dwindled to quick 10-minute check-ins. Visits became rushed affairs, often with Ivy looking at her watch or receiving emergency work calls that necessitated their early departure. When they got engaged after dating for 2 years, Thomas seemed to drift even further away. The wedding was an elaborate affair at an exclusive venue. Ivy's parents spared no expense. I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy blue ensemble I had purchased for a colleague's retirement party. Ivy's mother took one look at me and whispered something to her husband that made him smirk. I pretended not to notice. During the 7 years of their marriage, I watched as Thomas gradually transformed. The humble, compassionate boy I raised was replaced by someone who valued status and material possessions. New cars, designer clothes, exclusive club memberships. Ivy encouraged these changes, drawing him deeper into her world of privilege and excess. When I would gently suggest that perhaps they could save more for the future, Ivy would laugh and say, "We make too much money to worry about that, Hester. You really need to update your thinking." What neither of them knew was that after Michael died and I received his life insurance payout, I sought advice from his best friend, Warren, who was a financial advisor. Warren helped me invest the money wisely. I lived on my salary alone and reinvested all returns. Warren was impressed by my instinct for which investments would pay off, and over time, he began to consult me on some of his client recommendations. I kept my growing financial success to myself, partly because I never valued money the way Thomas and Ivy seemed to, and partly because I was curious to see how my son would treat me if he thought I had nothing to offer but love. The answer became increasingly clear, and it broke my heart. When Thomas called with an invitation to Christmas dinner at their new mansion, I was surprised. He had mentioned they were moving, but had never invited me to see the new place. I accepted immediately, hoping this might be a chance to reconnect with my son. The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with careful preparation. I wanted everything to be perfect, hoping this dinner might be a turning point in our strained relationship. I spent hours selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone who would be attending. For Thomas, I had something special. After Michael died, I had kept his pocket watch, a family heirloom passed down from his grandfather. It had stopped working years ago, but I had finally found a specialist who could restore it. The watchmaker had carefully cleaned every gear and spring, polishing the gold case until it gleamed. It had cost a small fortune, but seeing my husband's cherished possession restored to its former glory was worth every penny. For Ivy, despite our difficult relationship, I selected an expensive silk scarf in her favorite shade of blue. I had noticed her admiring similar ones in magazine spreads she left open when they visited. It was from a designer she often mentioned, and I hoped it might bridge the gap between us. I also purchased gifts for Ivy's parents, Warren and Margaret, whom I had met only at the wedding and a few formal occasions since. For Warren, a rare first edition of a book by his favorite author that I tracked down through a collector friend. For Margaret, a handcrafted silver bracelet from an artisan whose work was featured in the high-end boutiques she frequented. Ivy had mentioned her brother James and his wife Patricia would be there along with her sister Audrey and her husband Gregory. I had never met them, but selected elegant cashmere scarves for the men and delicate perfume sets for the women. I spent far more than I normally would, but I wanted to make a good impression and show that I could participate in their gift-giving traditions appropriately. The morning of Christmas, I woke early to prepare myself. I had purchased a new dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy velvet that the saleswoman assured me was both festive and flattering. I had my hair done at the local salon, something I rarely indulged in. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman trying very hard to fit into a world that didn't seem to want her. Still, I gathered my wrapped packages, carefully arranged them in the trunk of my 10-year-old Honda, and set off for the affluent suburb where Thomas and Ivy had recently moved. Their new neighborhood was even more imposing than I had imagined. Massive homes, set far back from the street, protected by ornate gates and security systems. My reliable old car looked painfully out of place among the luxury vehicles that lined the street. I parked in front of their 3-story Georgian-style mansion and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. The house was magnificent, with large columns flanking the entrance and professionally decorated Christmas lights adorning every tree and shrub. Through the large bay windows, I could see a towering Christmas tree glittering with what looked like crystal ornaments. I carried my bags of gifts to the front door and rang the bell. A young woman in a uniform opened it. A housekeeper, I realized with surprise. Thomas had never mentioned they had staff. "You must be Mrs. Wilson," she said politely. "Please come in. The family is in the main living room." I followed her through an enormous marble foyer, past rooms filled with furniture that looked too perfect to actually use. The house smelled of pine cinnamon and wealth. It was beautiful, but sterile, lacking the warmth of a real home. Ivy was the first to notice my arrival. She was wearing a stunning red dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my pension. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elegant updo, her makeup flawless. "Oh, Hester, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting she had half expected me not to come. She air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to make actual contact. "You can put those gifts under the tree. Denise will help you." She gestured to the housekeeper and then immediately turned away to greet someone else who had just arrived. I stood awkwardly with my packages until Denise gently took them from me and led me to the massive Christmas tree in the corner of the room. It must have been at least 12 feet tall, decorated in a coordinated theme of gold and crystal ornaments. Thomas was across the room, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. When he finally noticed me, he excused himself and came over. "Mom, glad you could make it," he said, giving me a quick, distracted hug. "Can I get you a drink? We have champagne wine. Or I can have Denise make you a coffee if you prefer." Before I could answer, he was called away by Ivy to meet some important guest. I opted for a glass of white wine from a passing server and found a quiet corner to observe the gathering. There were about 20 people in total, most of whom I didn't know. Ivy's parents held court near the fireplace. Warren was a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and an expensive suit. Margaret was slim and elegant, her jewelry catching the light whenever she moved. They both nodded curtly in my direction, but made no effort to come speak to me. I finally met Ivy's siblings and their spouses. James was older than Ivy, with the same blonde hair and sharp features. His wife, Patricia, was a former model, according to the whispered information from another guest. Audrey, the youngest, was petite and pretty, constantly checking her phone and taking selfies with her husband Gregory, who seemed bored by the whole affair. Throughout the pre-dinner mingling, I couldn't help but notice how I was subtly excluded from conversations. People would be talking animatedly, but when I approached the topic, would change to something more general, or they would politely excuse themselves. I overheard snippets about vacation homes, boarding schools, and country club memberships, all topics I had no experience with. "That's Thomas's mother," I heard Margaret whisper to another woman. "Worked as a secretary or something. Thomas is so generous to include her in these gatherings." I pretended not to hear, sipping my wine and reminding myself that I was here for Thomas, not these people who knew nothing about me or my life. The dining room was spectacular, with a table that could easily seat 30 people. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the perfectly arranged place settings of fine china silver and crystal. Name cards indicated our seating arrangements, and I noticed with a pang that I was placed at the far end of the table, away from Thomas and Ivy, who sat at opposite heads. I was seated between a business associate of Thomas's, whose name I immediately forgot, and a cousin of Ivy's, who spent the entire meal talking across me to someone else. The meal was elaborate, with course after course of beautifully presented food. Servers appeared and disappeared silently, refilling wine glasses and removing plates. I complimented Ivy on the delicious food when there was a brief lull in conversation near me. "Oh, we didn't cook any of this?" She laughed, as if the idea was absurd. "We have a private chef for special occasions. I wouldn't know the first thing about preparing a meal like this." "The food is excellent." I tried again. "You must have given the chef some guidance on the menu." "The chef knows what we like," she replied dismissively. "I just told him to make it impressive." The conversation moved on, and I fell silent again, feeling increasingly out of place. Throughout the meal, I observed Thomas interacting with Ivy's family and their friends. He was charming, confident, and completely at ease in this world of privilege. It was like watching a stranger who happened to have my son's face. After the dessert course, Ivy announced that it was time for the gift exchange. Everyone moved back to the living room, where the presents had multiplied since my arrival. Clearly, others had brought their gifts directly to the house earlier, or had them delivered. Thomas took charge of distributing the gifts, calling out names, and handing over beautifully wrapped packages. Ivy's father received a set of custom golf clubs that Thomas proudly announced had a 6-month waiting list. Her mother unwrapped a diamond tennis bracelet that elicited gasps of admiration from the other women. James and Patricia were given keys to a timeshare in Aspen, while Audrey and Gregory received matching luxury watches. Business associates and friends were presented with expensive bottles of Scotch designer accessories and gift cards to exclusive restaurants. Each gift was more lavish than the last, accompanied by exclamations of delight and thanks. I watched as my modest packages were opened. Ivy's parents barely acknowledged the gifts I had so carefully selected. Ivy unwrapped the silk scarf and said, "How nice," before setting it aside without trying it on. Thomas seemed genuinely touched by the restored pocket watch, studying it carefully before saying, "This was Grandpa's, wasn't it? Thanks, Mom." But within moments, he was distracted by Ivy calling him to look at something else. As the pile of gifts dwindled, I realized with a sinking feeling that my name had not been called. I kept waiting, thinking perhaps they had saved my gift for last, or that it was specially hidden somewhere. But when all the presents had been distributed and people were admiring their bounty, I sat empty-handed. The awkward moment stretched as people began to notice. Conversations quieted, and several guests glanced in my direction, with expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed amusement. I felt my face grow warm, but was determined not to show how hurt I was. Finally, I gathered my courage and spoke up. "Thomas was there, perhaps a gift for me, that got misplaced." The room fell silent. Thomas looked uncomfortable, glancing at Ivy, as if seeking guidance. Ivy gave a dismissive laugh that cut through the tension like a knife. "Oh, we must have misplaced yours, Hester. So sorry about that," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You know how chaotic things get during the holidays." Thomas said nothing, suddenly very interested in adjusting the band of his new watch. I saw Ivy's mother lean over to whisper something to her husband, who smirked in response. Ivy's sister, Audrey, took a quick photo of the scene with her phone before her husband nudged her to stop. I sat there feeling the weight of the humiliation press down on me. They had deliberately excluded me from the gift exchange, making it clear where I stood in their estimation. I was an afterthought, someone to be tolerated, but not truly included. And my son, my Thomas, had allowed it to happen. In that moment, as I sat, surrounded by people, enjoying their expensive gifts, I felt a storm of emotions brewing inside me. The room seemed to recede slightly, and memories flooded my mind in vivid detail. I remembered the night Thomas was born, how Michael and I had counted his tiny fingers and toes in wonder. I saw myself sitting at the kitchen table helping Thomas with his math homework, long after I should have been in bed, because I wanted him to succeed. I felt the phantom ache in my feet from the double shifts I worked to pay for his college textbooks. I recalled one particular night when Thomas was in his junior year at Wharton. I had just finished my second shift at the restaurant and was so tired I could barely stand. My checking account was nearly empty because I had just sent Thomas money for a study abroad program he wanted to attend. I had skipped dinner to save a few dollars and was making myself a piece of toast when the phone rang. It was Thomas, excited about an internship opportunity he had secured for the summer. His happiness had made my exhaustion and hunger fade away. All the sacrifices were worth it to give him a better life than I had. As these memories washed over me, I looked at my son now. He was laughing at something Ivy's brother had said, completely unbothered by what had just happened. The watch I had given him, his father's precious heirloom, sat neglected on the side table, while he admired his new golf simulator from Ivy. I glanced around the room at the faces of these strangers, who had judged me based on my modest appearance and quiet demeanor. They saw an aging woman of no consequence, someone who could be dismissed without a second thought. Ivy's parents were now openly discussing their upcoming cruise loudly enough for me to hear, as if to emphasize the disparity in our lifestyles. "What a shame. Hester didn't get a gift," Ivy's mother Margaret said, not bothering to lower her voice. "But perhaps they thought your presence was gift enough." This was followed by tittering laughter from several guests. I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a quiet, simmering anger. Not a destructive rage, but a clarifying force that burned away the fog of insecurity and people-pleasing that had clouded my judgment where Thomas was concerned. For years, I had accepted the gradual distancing, made excuses for his behavior, told myself that his happiness was all that mattered. I had hidden my success because I didn't want to seem like I was competing or trying to prove something. But in this moment, watching the room wait for me to either break down or slink away in embarrassment, I realized I had allowed this situation to develop by not standing up for myself sooner. These people, including my own son, had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. They had created a narrative about me based on superficial judgments, and I had never challenged it. The room seemed to be holding its breath, watching for my reaction. I could see Ivy's satisfied expression, thinking she had put me in my place. Thomas was still avoiding my eyes, a coward, in the face of this deliberate cruelty. I had two choices. I could accept the humiliation and maintain the status quo, or I could finally show them the woman I had become in the years since Michael's death. I chose the latter. I smiled calmly, a genuine smile that seemed to confuse those watching me closely. "That's okay," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Here's what I got myself." I reached into my handbag and took out a sleek leather portfolio that Warren had given me for my birthday. The room went completely silent as I opened it and removed several documents. After Michael died, I began addressing the room at large, though my eyes were fixed on Thomas. I inherited his modest investment portfolio. What most people don't know is that Michael had an excellent instinct for emerging markets, something he passed on to Thomas, actually. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expression changing from embarrassment to confusion. "I decided to build on what Michael started," I continued. "Over the past 15 years, I've grown that initial investment quite substantially. I laid out the first document, a summary of my real estate holdings. I own 16 commercial properties across 3 states, including the office park, where your company leases space, Thomas. I'm your landlord, essentially." I smiled at his shocked expression. "I also have a diverse stock portfolio." I continued, placing another document on the table, including a significant stake in Meridian Technologies. At this, several of the business associates in the room straightened up. Meridian was one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. "In fact," I said, warming to my subject now, "I hold a 15% stake in Meridian, which makes me their third largest shareholder." Thomas's face had drained of color. His firm had been trying to secure Meridian as a client for years, unsuccessfully. And here I was, casually announcing that I had enough voting power to influence company decisions. "Mom," Thomas finally managed to say, "is this some kind of joke?" "Not at all," I replied calmly. "I've simply chosen to live modestly. Material possessions have never meant much to me. I prefer to use my resources for things that matter." Ivy had gone very still, her eyes darting between me and the documents on the table. Her perfect composure was cracking around the edges. "Speaking of things that matter," I continued, removing another document from my portfolio, "I've been funding the Children's Hospital expansion project that you've been trying to get involved with Ivy. I'm the anonymous donor they've been mentioning in their fundraising materials." Ivy's jaw actually dropped. She had been desperately trying to get on the hospital's board of directors, seeing it as a stepping stone to greater social prominence. "And one more thing," I said, placing the final document on the table. "I recently purchased a controlling interest in the Westbrook building on Beacon Hill." I looked directly at Thomas and Ivy. "I believe you've been trying to buy an apartment there, the penthouse specifically." The room was so quiet, you could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel. Thomas looked like he might faint. Ivy was frantically trying to compose herself, her social mask slipping to reveal naked calculation beneath. "Why didn't you tell us?" Thomas finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I gathered my documents and returned them to my portfolio before answering. "I'm not sharing this information to embarrass you or to boast," I said quietly. "I'm telling you because I'm tired of being underestimated and overlooked. I've worked hard my entire life, first to give you opportunities, Thomas, and then to secure my own future. The fact that you thought so little of me, that you couldn't even be bothered to get me a Christmas gift, That you would allow me to be humiliated in front of all these people tells me everything I need to know about how you value our relationship." I stood up, smoothing down my burgundy dress. "I have an early meeting with my investment team tomorrow to discuss next quarter's strategy, so I should be going. Thank you for dinner." The food was lovely. The room remained frozen as I walked calmly to the door. No one spoke. No one moved. I collected my coat from the housekeeper, who was trying unsuccessfully to hide her smile, and left the mansion with my head held high. The next morning, my phone began ringing at 7. Thomas called 5 times before I finally answered. "Mom," he began immediately, his voice a mixture of apology and something else. "We need to talk about last night. I had no idea about your financial situation. Why did you keep it from me? Would it have made a difference in how you treated me?" I asked simply. His silence was answer enough. "Look, Mom, there's been a huge misunderstanding. Ivy and I definitely got you a gift. It must have gotten lost in the shuffle. We want to make it up to you. Can you come over for dinner tonight, just the 3 of us?" "I'm afraid I'm busy tonight," I replied. "In fact, I'm quite booked up for the next few weeks." After I hung up, the texts started coming in from Ivy. Suddenly, she wanted to take me shopping, have lunch, get to know me better. She even sent a card to my house with an expensive gift basket and a designer handbag. I donated both to a women's shelter. 3 days after Christmas, I met with my financial advisor, Warren, who happened to be a different Warren than Ivy's father, though the coincidence amused me. We were reviewing my portfolio and discussing some new investment opportunities. "So," Warren said with a twinkle in his eye, "I hear you caused quite a stir at your son's Christmas dinner." News travels fast in financial circles, and Warren had connections at Thomas's firm. I gave him a brief account of what had happened, and he shook his head in disbelief. "I've always said you're one of my most surprising clients, Hester. Living in that modest house while sitting on a fortune that would make most people's heads spin." "The house has good memories," I said simply, "and I've never needed much to be happy." As we wrapped up our meeting, Warren gave me a serious look. "What are you going to do about Thomas? He's been calling my office, you know, trying to get information about your holdings." "That sounds like Thomas." I sighed, always looking for an angle. Later that afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Thomas standing on my porch, looking uncertain. It was strange seeing him here. He rarely visited my home anymore, always suggesting we meet at restaurants instead. "Can I come in?" he asked, shifting from foot to foot, like he used to do as a boy, when he knew he was in trouble. I gestured for him to enter, watching, as he took in the familiar surroundings with new eyes. The comfortable but well-worn furniture, the walls covered with photos of our family. Through the years, the simple Christmas decorations I had put up. "Your home always feels so," he paused, searching for the word peaceful. "It's not full of expensive things, if that's what you mean," I replied, leading him to the living room. "But it's full of what matters to me." Thomas sat on the couch, looking around as if seeing my house for the first time. "Mom, I owe you an apology. What happened at Christmas was unforgivable." "Yet, here you are seeking forgiveness," I observed. He had the grace to look ashamed. "It was Ivy's idea not to get you anything. She said you never care about material things and wouldn't notice. I should have stood up to her, but it was easier to go along. I've been doing that a lot lately, I realize." "You're a grown man, Thomas. You make your own choices." He nodded, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture so like his father's that it made my heart ache. "When did you become so successful in business? Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have believed me if I told you Or would you have assumed I was confused about finances, like the time you tried to explain my own mortgage to me? He winced at the memory. I've been condescending, haven't I? You've been absent, Thomas. Not just physically, but emotionally. You stopped sharing your life with me long ago, and when we were together, you were always checking the time, or your phone. I became background noise in your life, not a person worth really seeing or hearing. That's not true, he protested, but weakly. When was the last time you asked me about my life, my interests, my friends? You assumed I had nothing going on worth discussing. He was quiet for a long moment. You're right, he finally said. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing you as an obligation rather than as my mother. Ivy always complained about family obligations, and I adopted her viewpoint without even realizing it. And now that you know I'm wealthy, I asked pointedly. Thomas flushed. I won't pretend it doesn't change things, but not in the way you might think. It's made me realize how little I know you anymore. The mother I thought I had wouldn't know the first thing about investing or corporate holdings. But clearly, that's not who you are at all. I'm the same person. I've always been Thomas. I just stopped sharing parts of myself with someone who wasn't interested. He nodded slowly. I want to fix this, Mom. Please, come to dinner next week. I promise it will just be us. No Ivy, no pretension. We can start over. I'm not interested in a relationship based on what I can do for you financially, Thomas. That's not what this is about, he insisted. Finding out about your success was a wake-up call, yes, but it's made me realize how much of your life I've been missing. I want to know who you really are, not just as my mother, but as Hester Wilson, the woman who built an empire while no one was looking. I studied his face, searching for signs of the boy I raised. There was genuine regret there, but also calculation. He was his father's son, always looking for the best angle. But he was also my son, capable of great kindness when he allowed himself to be. I'm not ready for that yet, I said finally. I need time, Thomas. Trust is rebuilt only through consistent actions, not grand gestures or sudden interest. He looked disappointed, but nodded. I understand. Can I at least call you more regularly? That would be a start, I conceded. After Thomas left, I sat in my living room, reflecting on how much had changed in just a few days. The carefully constructed walls between my personal and financial lives had come tumbling down, and I was still sorting through the debris. The weeks following that Christmas dinner became a period of profound transformation in my life. While the initial revelation had been motivated by hurt and a desire to stand up for myself, its aftermath led me down an unexpected path of healing and renewal. I began by examining my own role in the dynamics with Thomas and Ivy. For years, I had enabled their behavior by accepting the crumbs of attention they offered, never demanding the respect I deserved. I had hidden my success, partly out of modesty, but also from a fear that if Thomas knew I didn't need his occasional financial help, he might stop visiting altogether. That realization was painful, but necessary for my growth. With this new clarity, I made a decision to stop hiding. Not just my financial success, but all aspects of who I had become. I joined the board of several companies where I held significant investments, bringing my practical wisdom to their discussions. At first, the predominantly male members seemed surprised by my straightforward approach, but they quickly came to value my perspective. My most meaningful venture began with a chance encounter. While attending a business luncheon, I met Sandra, a single mother working as a server at the event. During a quiet moment, she mentioned she was taking night classes in accounting while raising her daughter alone. Her situation reminded me so much of my own struggles after Michael died that I was moved to action. Within a month, I had established the Second Chapter Foundation, dedicated to helping single parents put their children through college. We provided not just financial assistance, but mentoring childcare solutions and career guidance. The foundation became my passion, a way to turn my private success into public good. As my foundation grew, I found myself surrounded by new friends who appreciated me for my mind, my experience, and my generosity, not my bank account. I joined a book club, took up watercolor painting, and even tried ballroom dancing activities I had always been interested in, but never made time for. Thomas called regularly as promised. Our conversations were awkward at first, both of us navigating new territory. He would ask about my investments, clearly still trying to reconcile the mother he knew with the businesswoman he had revealed myself to be. I answered his questions, but also redirected our conversations to more personal matters, asking about his hopes and worries, the things that used to bind us together. 3 months after Christmas, Thomas invited me to lunch at a casual neighborhood restaurant, not one of the exclusive places he usually frequented. When I arrived, I was surprised to find him alone, without Ivy. He seemed different, more relaxed in jeans and a sweater, rather than his usual designer suits. Ivy and I are seeing a marriage counselor, he told me after we ordered. Things have been difficult since Christmas. That night forced me to see aspects of our relationship that I'd been ignoring. The way she treated you, I realized she treats others the same way, including me sometimes. I'm sorry to hear you're having troubles, I said, meaning it despite everything. But I'm glad you're working on it rather than ignoring the problems. That's what I've always done, isn't it? Ignored problems until they became too big to handle. He gave a rueful smile. I learned that from Dad, I think. He always said business problems could be solved by looking the other way until a better opportunity came along. Your father was brilliant with investments, but not always with people, I acknowledged. Including me, sometimes. Thomas looked surprised. I always thought you and Dad had the perfect marriage. We loved each other deeply. But marriage is never perfect, Thomas. We had our struggles like any couple. The difference is that we faced them together. We didn't let them fester. This seemed to give him something to think about. As our lunch progressed, I saw glimpses of the thoughtful young man Thomas had once been before ambition, and Ivy's influence had hardened him. Over the following months, our relationship slowly began to heal. Thomas made consistent efforts to be present in my life, calling regularly and visiting without Ivy. He took a genuine interest in the Second Chapter Foundation, eventually joining its board and leveraging his business connections to increase our funding. Ivy remained a more complicated situation when she realized that her cold shoulder tactics weren't affecting me. She switched to excessive friendliness that felt equally insincere. She would send expensive gifts that I unfailingly donated, invite me to social events where she could introduce me as Thomas's mother, the secret millionaire, and try to extract investment tips during awkward lunches. I maintained polite but firm boundaries, with her neither antagonistic nor overly familiar. I soon realized that I needed to create some distance from them to maintain my own peace of mind. I declined most of their invitations, choosing instead to focus on my foundation and my new friendships. This distance was painful, but necessary, allowing me to build a life that wasn't centered around waiting for my son's attention. The greatest joy of this period came from working with the recipients of my foundation's support. Watching single parents graduate with degrees while their children cheered them on reminded me of why I had worked so hard all those years ago. Each success story healed a piece of my heart that had been broken by Thomas's indifference. One year, after that fateful Christmas dinner, I received a call from an organization honoring philanthropists who had made significant impacts in their communities. They wanted to present me with their annual Achievement in Community Service award. The ceremony would be public, meaning my anonymous donations would finally be linked to my name. I accepted the honor with a mixture of pride and humility. When I called Thomas to share the news, he insisted on attending. To my surprise, he came alone, explaining that he and Ivy had separated 2 months earlier. The revelation that I had been so absorbed in my own life that I hadn't even noticed this major change in his was both empowering and slightly sobering. At the award ceremony, I spoke about second chances and the importance of recognizing your own worth. As I looked out at the audience, I saw Thomas watching me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, one of genuine admiration and respect. Not because of my wealth or status, but because of who I was as a person. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed, I came to understand that true wealth had nothing to do with my investment portfolio or property holdings. It was found in self-respect that couldn't be shaken by others' opinions, in the freedom to live authentically, without fear of judgment, and in knowing that my value as a human being was inherent, not determined by what I could provide to others. The journey from that humiliating Christmas dinner to this place of peace wasn't linear or easy. There were still days when the memory of Thomas's silence in the face of Ivy's cruelty stung sharply. There were moments when I questioned whether I should have revealed my financial success at all, whether it might have been better to maintain the illusion and preserve what little relationship we had. But those doubts grew fewer as I witnessed the impact of living truthfully. My foundation helped dozens of families break cycles of financial struggle. My business acumen, no longer hidden, helped guide companies toward more ethical and sustainable practices. And perhaps most importantly, I built relationships based on mutual respect and genuine connection rather than obligation or advantage. Thomas and I continued to rebuild our relationship one honest conversation at a time. It will never be what it once was, and perhaps that's for the best. We're getting to know each other as adults, with all our flaws and strengths laid bare. There is the authenticity to our interactions now that was missing before. As for Ivy, she eventually moved to New York after the divorce was finalized. The last I heard, she was dating a hedge fund manager and still moving in the same social circles. Thomas seems lighter, without her influence, slowly rediscovering parts of himself that had been suppressed during their marriage. The greatest lesson I learned through all of this is that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. For too long, I accepted less than I deserved, out of fear of losing what little connection I had with my son. That Christmas dinner, painful as it was, forced me to recognize my own worth and demand that others recognize it too. Now, I ask you, my friends watching this, have you ever allowed yourself to be undervalued by those who should appreciate you most? Have you hidden parts of yourself to make others comfortable? What would happen if you stood in your full truth and demanded the respect you deserve? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' perceptions. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late for a second chapter.